Good morning, Isaac. Thank you for joining me for this discussion. We are going to spend the next little while talking about all things Africa. Africa is an important market for Altanimi, and you're an old Africa hand. Batha has been doing a lot of work on the continent over the past several years. I think to kick things off, certainly there's any number of statistics and economic indicators that one can look at, but certainly before COVID, the African economy was humming along, one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. COVID hit. It hit the entire world. I think it's probably fair to say that from a sort of health perspective, Africa has weathered the storm fairly well. Certainly, everybody has had their challenges, but it's weathered the storm fairly well. Of course, now everyone is saying, what is going to be the impact of COVID on the global economy, and how is that going to impact Africa? What do you think in that regard?
Yeah, Tom, thank you so much for having me this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I think COVID has been disastrous everywhere, but I think you're right in that from a health perspective, at least so far with Africa, that's the continent has been spared. But having said that, I think that there are some countries in Africa that have also suffered quite tremendously. I mean, if you look at places like Tanzania and other Tanzania as an example, because of potentially bad policies, COVID has affected the country a bit more than it has at other places. Countries like Rwanda, Ghana, to a certain extent Kenya, even South Africa, have done a very good job of making sure that they've protected their populations and ensure that they are doing contact tracing and everything along those lines. From an economic standpoint, I think the average African SME probably hasn't felt the shocks of COVID because a lot of these guys are used to sort of grinding and hustling through, waiting for payments to come for a long time. So I think they're used to being more resilient. I think the issues around resiliency and agility has been sort of integral in terms of how Africans operate business-wise. But I think what is exposed are sort of the fault lines in the public sector, because now when you don't have enough tax revenue and governments don't have money in the treasury to give out to actually attend to the to public needs, that becomes a problem. And I think that's going to be, I think we're going to see sort of a medium-term repercussions of that on these economies. So yes, it's anticipated that a lot of African economies are going to bounce back in 2021, 2022. But my personal view is that it's probably going to take us 5 to 8 years to recover fully from this pandemic, assuming that 2021 becomes a watershed for vaccines and everything else, which is also quite debatable.
Good. In terms of trade and investment, we're seeing an increasing number of businesses and investors from the Middle East looking at Africa. I think here again, if you look at the statistics, a few short years ago, UAE, I think, was ranked maybe 4th in terms of foreign investors into the African continent, behind only China, France, and the United States, if I'm not mistaken. My understanding is UAE has actually been moving up that list. It's now 2nd behind China. Another key country that's investing in the continent from here in the region, of course, is Saudi Arabia. What opportunities do you see in Africa for businesses and investors from the Middle East?
I think the stats you mentioned is quite tremendous. I mean, you've seen almost like you've seen a almost triple-digit growth in Africa, Middle East trade and investments over the last 10, 15 years or so, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia, as you so correctly mentioned. In the UAE alone, I believe there were 20,000 African businesses registered here. And in terms of people who are visiting, even from the tourism side, you're seeing close to 1 million people coming to the UAE just on holiday. And I think what that means is that over the last 15, 20 years, that relationship has grown organically. And I'm not sure that it's been a sort of a hardcore government intervention to actually grow the relationship, but I think because it's been organic, it's also meant that it's been a bit more fruitful. Now, in terms of opportunities, I see quite a few. I mean, if you look at in the last 10 years, what DP World has been doing in Africa has been tremendous. They have an inland port in Rwanda. They just signed a deal, I think, to operate ports in Angola. They also operated in Senegal. I mean, those are all quite heavy-duty projects in the logistics space. So I think logistics presents a very good opportunity for investors from this region. Also alongside logistics, I think around e-commerce, again, back to DP World. DP World recently, I think a month ago, set up an e-commerce hub where you can actually buy goods from Dubai and ship to the continent, operating leveraging their supply chain. And that, I think, goes back to your COVID question, because supply chains has been disrupted, companies like DP World have found a way to actually intervene in that and actually make money fixing those chains. So I think logistics is a very, very interesting space for the region. The second space is agriculture. Now, agriculture is a bit nuanced. So we've been talking about Africa having 60% of the global world arable land for a long time, and how the GCC, and especially the Middle East, the GCC especially, has food security issues. We haven't seen that translate 100% on the ground in Africa, and I think because there are also some issues around, how do you create economies where you're able to feed yourself first and export later. Logistic agriculture is interesting. Tech is also an interesting space. You're seeing, especially in Saudi, you're seeing a lot of Saudi tech companies looking to invest on the continent, both in North Africa and also Sub-Saharan Africa. Egypt, goes without saying. There's a lot of conversations that happen, payment gateways going from Saudi or the UAE, including Egypt, Morocco, and increasingly going south to the rest of the continent. Outside of tech, I think another area that I find very interesting for this region is around the space of the creative industry. Both the UAE and KSA governments have been very bullish on promoting the creative industry. And I think the same thing's happening in Africa. And I think what's interesting about that storyline is that because of the shared culture between the two regions and the long history that the two regions have, you're going to start now seeing a lot of local content being consumed, actually being produced and consumed in the region. Now, Tom, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about investments and what's happening in the investment space and trading space, but I'm curious about the legal space as well. How have you experienced the continent, I guess, since your time working here and looking at Africa as a marketplace, and the clients that you advise? What are some of the what are some of the best practices or takeaways that you've realized talking to clients and leading people into the continent?
Yeah, I think things are moving in the right direction on that front. We see a variety of legal issues that we're dealing with when it comes to our clients here in the region and in Africa. I mean, in many respects, a lot of the legal issues you run into in Africa are very similar to what you'd run into here in the Middle East or in Asia or North America, Europe, what have you. I mean, we're seeing a lot of inquiries from clients related to COVID. Can employers in Africa vaccinate their employees? We see that there, we see it here. There are several key areas: IP rights, data protection, these sort of common themes, these common issues we see in the continent, we see elsewhere. I'm a dispute resolution lawyer. I focus on arbitration, and I think that's one area in particular where you're seeing a very good narrative developing in Africa. There are a number of arbitral institutions emerging on the continent in Rwanda, in Kenya, in Nigeria, Mauritius, South Africa. I think when you look at North Africa, you have to mention the Cairo Regional Center, which has been a key arbitral institution here in the Middle East, but is also really focused on Sub-Saharan Africa as well, and geographically located in Africa. Casablanca is doing a good job as well. And I think over time, more and more businesses, more and more foreign investors are becoming comfortable with these arbitral institutions. I think the related issue is the court systems in different parts of Africa. And there, again, it's 54 jurisdictions across Africa. So you've got different legal systems, different courts at different stages. Some are more reliable than others. But I think for foreign investors, that remains one question mark. Are the courts in this particular jurisdiction strong or not? But you're seeing you have a very strong legal profession in Africa. We've developed relationships with several African law firms and networks of law firms in Africa. And with developments like we talked about with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think the sort of the legal culture in Africa is strong and growing.
And let me ask you, do multinationals that you advise, I believe 45 multinationals have their headquarters based here going into Africa. Do they trust the African law firms that you work with? Is it an issue of trust, or is it an issue of real bottlenecks in the legal system? And what is the delta between those two?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's every case is different. Every jurisdiction is different. And it's not just Africa. It's worldwide. I think many clients look to their lawyers as trusted advisors. They're comfortable working with people that they know. And when they're going into a new jurisdiction, often it's challenging for those clients to find those trusted advisors in that new jurisdiction. And I think they feel comfortable when they can work with a law firm that they already know, but adding to that team. Are there particular jurisdictions or regions in sub-Saharan Africa that you think will be a more natural gateway or investment opportunity for investors from the Middle East?
Yeah, I think traditionally there's been a tendency to sort of go from the region to North Africa, right? So it's quite natural, history, culture, what have you. So I'm a company in the UK. Say I go to Cairo, set up in Cairo for a while, eventually maybe something in Morocco. My entry point is Morocco. And I think, again, outside of the cultural reasons and cultural and maybe historical reasons, I think increasingly you are going to see companies who will keep doing that, but also are going to go more directly to the source, especially East Africa, because East Africa is also closer to the region. And what I was alluded to earlier, as more, and I think this is almost around human psychology, the more folks visit the region, the more people interact with each other, I think the more natural some of these conversations get. So yes, while I think North Africa will be a very important hub for investment into Sub-Saharan Africa from the region, I think increasingly, whether it's East Africa, countries like Kenya are going to serve as interesting hubs for this relationship, which it does, but I think it's going to grow. I think in West Africa, Nigeria maybe, but the debate is out of Nigeria, maybe Ghana. I think Ghana is maybe a softer entry into West Africa. And then I think in Southern Africa, obviously, South Africa is the regional hegemon. So it makes sense that investments that are going from this region into the southern part of the continent are going to probably go through South Africa as a natural place. So yes, I think I see different spaces where folks can play.
Isaac, thank you very much for joining us today. We've covered a lot of ground. There's plenty to talk about, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.